Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so if you spend literally any time scrolling through the USA independent gossip news space, and by that I mean decoding those wild blind items, reading super niche pop culture substacks, or falling completely down the rabbit hole of celebrity analysis TikToks, you know exactly how incredibly fast a simple rumor can escalate. I mean, it goes from a tiny whisper to a full-blown cultural referendum in a matter of hours, right? Well, recently, the U.S. independent gossip space practically broke in half over this massive piece of unconfirmed elite entertainment news. The rumor going around was that Taylor Swift, who is unequivocally the biggest pop star on planet Earth, was planning this spectacular Jumbotron-style wedding to three-time Super Bowl champion Travis Kelce, and she was going to do it right in the middle of Madison Square Garden. No, seriously, that was the rumor. Now, under normal circumstances, a celebrity wedding rumor is just, par for the course. It usually sparks a few fun days of dress speculation and crazy guest list predictions. But the cultural reaction that followed this specific piece of gossip within the independent commentary space, it was nothing short of a fascinating psychological phenomenon. We didn't just see congratulations. Oh no, we saw absolute existential panic. Niche internet commentators, vloggers, and independent gossip columns began spiraling into this collective meltdown. They weren't just discussing the venue or the catering. They were treating this rumored wedding as the ultimate betrayal of modern womanhood. The discourse almost instantly shifted from fun entertainment news to a severe moral panic about female regression. But here is the fascinating question we are going to unravel today by looking strictly at the primary source material. Is the idea of Taylor Swift getting married actually a tragic feminist backslide, like so many of these loud internet commentators are claiming? Or is it actually the logical, unapologetic culmination of a mastermind plan she has been openly writing about for 2 entire decades? Let's trace the origins of this panic. To really understand the sheer scale of this backlash, we have to look at how a single think piece can be completely weaponized by the internet. So a recent New York Times op-ed stated quite bluntly about the rumored wedding, and I quote, "I feel depressed." The author actually went on to argue that by settling down with a Kansas City football player, the most powerful woman in the entire music industry has somehow caved to gendered expectations. Now, what is absolutely critical here isn't just the legacy media article itself, but how the U.S. independent gossip sphere immediately reacted to it and amplified it out of proportion. The original op-ed took a personal aesthetic dislike of Madison Square Garden, literally calling it unromantic and comparing it to a Roman Colosseum, and morphed that into a sweeping moral indictment. They even compared the vibe to a Trumpish miasma. And U.S. independent pop culture commentators, they took that exact framing and ran with it at warp speed. They turned a single op-ed into thousands of hot takes, independent podcasts, and heavily edited video essays, all echoing the exact same underlying claim, that Taylor Swift is essentially reducing herself to a 1950s wag. Now, if you aren't familiar with that term, WAG is an acronym for Wives and Girlfriends of High-Profile Sportsmen. In the current U.S. cultural zeitgeist, being a WAG has its own very distinct aesthetic. It usually implies standing on the sidelines, wearing the team colors, and letting your partner's athletic achievements define your entire public persona. For the independent gossip space, the idea that a billionaire woman who literally single-handedly impacts local economies would willingly adopt the WAG lifestyle is treated as a betrayal of the highest order. It's an incredibly heavy accusation to hurl at a woman, but we really have to ask ourselves if this panic is actually based on facts about her life, or if it is purely based on how internet commentators demand that she behave.
To go a layer deeper into this online phenomenon, we need to clearly define the intense, anti-feminist label that niche U.S. gossip circles are suddenly just throwing at her left and right. The phrase absolutely dominating these specific comment sections and independent newsletters right now is tradwife. Now, tradwife ideology is a very specific, highly visible internet worldview. It's a belief system where a woman's primary purpose is to submit to her spouse, recognizing the man as the domineering leader, and prioritizing domesticity completely over her own independence, basically giving up everything to serve the household. What we are seeing right now is U.S. independent gossip commentators actively attempting to neatly fold Taylor's rumored wedding into the broader anti-feminist waves of the current decade. They're actively trying to group her alongside men's rights activists and extreme influencers who encourage young women to aspire only to marriage and motherhood at the total expense of getting an education or having a career. But guys, here is where we absolutely must take a step back and practice some critical thinking. Seriously, think about it. Has Taylor Swift ever, in her massive body of work, advocated for female submission? Has she ever framed men as rightful domineering leaders and women as naturally subordinate? The answer is a resounding no. The independent gossip media is aggressively projecting this intense label onto her simply because she might want a wedding ring and she happens to enjoy baking for her boyfriend. I mean, come on. I am going to tease something right now that sets the stage for our entire analysis today, everyone pushing this narrative has completely misread the situation. Wanting marriage, wanting a family, and enjoying domestic tasks is not in itself evidence of adopting a submissive ideology.
So we are currently witnessing a massive cultural disconnect, and it plays out as a literal battle between two very different texts. On one side, we have the U.S. independent gossip media's projection. As cultural analysts so often point out, a megastar of this magnitude functions as a reflective surface. She's essentially the ultimate mirror that society uses to rehearse its own moral panics. Niche internet communities take their collective, deep-seated anxieties about modern feminism, class, politics, and shifting traditions, and they project them entirely onto her personal life choices. It's wild to watch. But on the other side of this equation, we have her actual 20-year discography. Today, in this explainer, we are going to practice some serious media literacy hygiene. Because let's be honest, in the independent gossip economy, which thrives purely on engagement and outrage, it is incredibly easy for a commentator to just grab one single lyric that perfectly matches their preconceived narrative, strip it completely out of context, and build an entire viral argument about a real person's life. This flattens complex female figures into easily digestible tropes. It's a cheap trick. But when we do a deep dive into her lyrics, reading the actual text she's meticulously published over the last 2 decades, it tells a completely different and frankly far more revealing story about the modern female experience. We are going to look directly at the primary source material, her own words, to see what story she's actually been telling us about marriage, ambition, and love from the very, very start.
When we actually trace this back to the beginning, the timeline reveals a completely different story than the one currently dominating your social media feeds. We are going era by era right now to establish that this woman has been openly writing fan fiction about eternal partnership from day one. In 2006, way back on her debut album, we get Mary Song. Now, this isn't just some cute teenage crush anthem. It is literal fan fiction about growing old with a partner, getting married, having children, and sitting on the front porch together at 89 years old. Monogamous, exclusive, lifelong partnership was her top stated priority right out of the gate. Then, in 2008, we hit the monumental cultural reset of Love Story. I mean, she literally rewrites the tragic ending of a classic Shakespearean play just so she can become the fairy tale princess who gets a ring and lives happily ever after. She couldn't stomach the tragedy, so she wrote her way into a proposal. By 2010, with the song Mine, the picture matures significantly. She moves from fairy tales into the realities of adulthood. She's singing about a drawer of her things at his place, visualizing domestic scenes on the couch, and navigating the terrifying reality of paying a mortgage. But more importantly, she sings about an equal partnership where, in the middle of a hard fight, her partner says, "I'll never leave you alone." She isn't writing about submitting to a man, she's writing about choosing each other forever despite life's inevitable obstacles. And then in 2012 with Begin Again, after experiencing catastrophic, very public heartbreak, she writes about the sheer resilience of optimism. She imagines the simple domestic joy of sitting with a new partner's family at Christmas. She is constantly resuscitating her own broken heart, throwing herself back into the dating pool because she fundamentally believes that finding a forever partner is the ultimate goal.
Now, if you regularly consume U.S. independent gossip newsletters or follow those specific pop culture video essayists, you will undoubtedly see this exact quote used as their ultimate weapon against her. From her song 15, she famously wrote, "In your life, you'll do things greater than dating the boy on the football team." Independent gossip creators absolutely love to use this. They point at it and say, "Look, she promised us she was above the football player. She had a feminist awakening, and now she's betraying her own foundational text." This brilliantly illustrates the profound irony of how independent media strips lyrics of their original intent just to farm engagement. Let's completely dismantle this narrative right now. If you look at the full context of the song, she never once instructed her listeners to entirely avoid dating or marrying the football star. Not at all. She was simply telling her fellow teenage girls that their lives needed to be bigger than just revolving around a man. She was advising them to realize their own massive dreams first. And the incredible, undeniable reality is that she lived this lyric to the absolute letter. She actually did the greater things first. What did greater things look like for her? Well, it looked like conquering the entire global music industry, executing record-breaking stadium tours that literally alter the U.S. economy, and becoming a self-made billionaire. I mean, talk about doing the greater things. Having achieved that unfathomable level of independence, she is now circling back to the guy on the football team. She didn't break her promise to her audience, she simply completed the first part of the mission.
As her career exploded into the massive pop eras of the 2010s, something totally fascinating happened with the narrative surrounding her. We see what I call this subversive shift. Around the time of her transition into mainstream pop, and particularly during her documentary Miss American, the U.S. independent gossip sphere desperately wanted to believe she was having an anti-marriage feminist awakening. In that documentary, if you remember, she talked openly about refusing the good girl script. She was exhausted from being politically sanitized and forced to stay quiet just to please conservative industry executives. She wanted to finally speak out on politics and human rights. But niche pop culture blogs and independent gossip newsletters aggressively conflated two completely different concepts. They assumed that because she no longer wanted to be a politically silent, agreeable good girl, that inherently meant she was simultaneously rejecting domesticity, marriage, and children. They linked her newfound political voice with a vow of eternal singledom, effectively deciding that a politically active woman cannot also be a woman who wants a traditional family structure. They thought she was rejecting domesticity forever. But as we continue to track the primary source material, you are going to see that this narrative was entirely fabricated by observers. The real story of her pop eras was heavily saturated with exactly what they thought she was running away from.
Which brings us to the most cherry-picked, weaponized lyric of her entire modern career from the song Lavender Haze. No deal, the 1950s they want from me. U.S. independent commentators and TikTok sleuths treat this lyric like a solemn, lifelong oath. They claim it is a blatantly feminist line in the sand where she permanently refuses the institution of marriage. But again, we have to actually look at the source material. In that very same song, the preceding line is literally, the only kind of girl they see is a one-night or a wife. She is not rejecting the concept of eternal vows, she is rejecting the U.S. independent gossip media's obsessive, flattening binary. She is directly calling out the gossip industry that demands a woman be categorized as either a scandalous, disposable slut or a respectable, submissive wife. The 1950s she is refusing here isn't marriage itself. It is the suffocating societal lens that tries to force her into a neat little box and make her a mere accessory in a man's story. Exposing the truth behind this lyric proves she was pushing back against toxic public perception, not foreclosing the idea that she wanted vows on her own equitable terms. She wants the marriage, but she absolutely refuses to be minimized by it. It's about setting the terms of her own life.
Now, if there is literally any lingering doubt that she's been prioritizing marriage throughout her pop career, we simply need to look at this undeniable list of hidden vows from her supposedly most subversive independent albums. We have to slow down here because the evolution is just critical. On her Pop Bible 1989, in How You Get the Girl, she literally paraphrases traditional wedding vows, demanding the man step up and say, "I want you for worse or for better." Then, on Reputation, the album the U.S. independent gossip space praised as her dark, messy, rebellious era, she's actually fiercely devoted. While hiding from the public eye, she is desperately seeking private devotion, singing, "You're the one I've been waiting for," and begging on the track Endgame to be his first string. Then we get to Lover, which honestly is basically a deeply anxious wedding album in disguise. She sings, "I'd marry you with paper rings," which perfectly highlights the anxiety of having immense wealth, but realizing absolutely none of it matters if you can't secure true love. She imagines a crowd standing as she takes her vows, and finally, on Midnights, in the devastating addendum track, "You're Losing Me," she delivers an absolute, heartbreaking ultimatum to a partner who won't commit. "Choose something, babe. I got nothing to believe unless you're choosing me." She is essentially saying, "Get down on one knee and give me a ring, or I'm walking out the door." From 2014 to 2022, she wasn't rejecting marriage, she was secretly begging for commitment the entire time.
This brings us to the philosophical core of this entire explainer today, understanding the agonizing tension at the center of her art. The U.S. independent gossip space continually wants to present this as a zero-sum game, the ambition to conquer the world versus the craving for domestic stability. They constantly argue that her intense, supposedly unfeminine longing for fame and money must naturally be juxtaposed against a resistance to domestic life. But that is completely wrong, and it fundamentally misunderstands the modern female experience. As women, we are constantly told we have to choose between extreme career ambition and a traditional home life. You can't have both, right? Well, the real through line in her massive discography is an anxious rebellion against having to choose. She has a near pathological desire for both. She wants the billion-dollar, world-dominating career, and she wants the forever kitchen table marriage. And she fiercely refuses to treat those desires as mutually exclusive. The tension in her music isn't that domesticity threatens her ambition. The tension is her deep, vulnerable fear that she won't be able to find a man willing to meet her at equal eye level. She is terrified of a world that is fundamentally hostile to the fragile domestic bubble she is trying to build, while she simultaneously rules the globe. She wants it all, and the deep anxiety comes from wondering if society and the men she dates will actually allow a woman with her unprecedented power to have both.
Now, I really want you to think about this cliffhanger question before we move into her most recent work. The independent internet commentators fiercely claim she launched this great subversive effort to resist a domestic life of marriage and children. Okay, but if she secretly hated marriage, and if she viewed it as a patriarchal prison like the gossip blogs suggest, Why did she just release an entire massive double album, chronicling the absolute soul-crushing devastation of being denied a wedding ring? I mean, think about it. The U.S. independent gossip channels were heavily anticipating the Tortured Poets Department as a triumphant single-girl anthem. They were ready for it. Instead, they got an album where a woman spends 31 tracks unraveling her own sanity over the fact that a man wouldn't formally commit to her. Why would a woman who views marriage as a feminist backslide write a magnum opus about the grief of not being chosen? It simply doesn't add up with the narrative the internet has built for her. Let's look at the profound grief she actually confessed. Let's dig deep into the emotional gravity of these confessions, because this is the dark, devastating climax of her recent work. The independent media initially praised this album for its horny, messy, miserable persona, acting like she was further cementing her rebellious independence. But they completely missed the plot. This record only exists because she suffered a profound mental breakdown over being conned out of the marriage and children she so desperately wanted. Just look at the specific sting of these lyrics. On So Long London, she is furious and grieving that she wasted her youth, singing she died on the altar waiting for the proof. She's explicitly stating her end goal was a wedding. Then, referencing her fleeting, chaotic rebound relationship, she reveals the devastating manipulation. You talk to me under the table, talking rings, talking cradles. She was promised a traditional future, a wedding and babies, and when it was abruptly yanked away, it shattered her. And on the title track, the desire isn't even hidden in clever metaphor. She bluntly, desperately sings, "Take my ring off my middle finger and put it on the one people put wedding rings on." That is the closest she comes to her heart fully exploding on track. She was driven to madness because someone promised her the exact domestic fantasy she has been writing about since she was 16, only to rip it away. This perfectly encapsulates the ultimate feminist reality that U.S. independent gossip creators are struggling so hard to grasp right now. Wanting it all. Wanting a family, wanting a husband, wanting to settle down. Absolutely none of that erases 20 years of girl-bossing the global music industry into submission. The modern phrase for this is boss up, settle down. Why does achieving a monumental level of success suddenly mean a woman is barred from participating in traditional milestones if she chooses to? This represents a deeply unfair modern feminist catch-22. True feminism is about the freedom of choice. She built her life on a foundation of unyielding ambition, breaking records, and creating an empire from the ground up. The idea that deciding to share that empire with a partner is somehow a capitulation is, frankly, insulting to her autonomy and the autonomy of successful women everywhere. She is not submitting to a traditional 1950s structure where she loses her voice. She is actively inviting a partner into the massive world she built. Getting married at Madison Square Garden doesn't cancel out her Grammys, her billionaire status, or her unparalleled lyrical genius. It is simply the realization of the second half of her lifelong dream. If there is any lingering doubt, if anyone in the pop culture analysis sphere is still clinging to the idea that her rumored wedding is a betrayal of her own words, I present to you this absolute mic drop lyric from her latest album. She looks directly at the audience, directly at the U.S. independent gossip columns, and says clearly, "When I said I don't believe in marriage, that was a lie." Wow, there it is, the definitive, undeniable proof that the internet's entire trad wife capitulation narrative is fabricated. The gossip channels completely ignored this specific lyric because it entirely destroyed their narrative. Think about the profound vulnerability it takes for a megastar to admit this to the world. Anytime she tried to play the cool girl who didn't care about a ring, anytime she masked her desire to protect her own ego while dating men who wouldn't commit, she admits it was all a defensive mechanism. She was lying to protect herself. She does believe in it. She has always believed in it. She has been writing her way toward vows and forever from the very first track she ever released. The only mismatch here is between the story she actually wrote and the story the internet desperately wished she would write. Which brings us to our final and perhaps most important question today. When we read these fierce blog posts and scroll through the endless stream of U.S. independent gossip news, are we actually analyzing Taylor Swift's life? Or are we just using her as a giant cultural mirror to reflect our own modern anxieties? These niche online spaces often function as massive echo chambers of our own insecurities. When internet commentators get angry about a rumored wedding at Madison Square Garden, it's rarely about the pop star herself. It is about our collective fears regarding the loss of hard-won feminist ground, our deep anxieties about shifting gender roles, and our unease with traditional institutions in a rapidly changing modern world. It is parasocialism at its absolute peak. We project our own aesthetic preferences and moral panics onto a woman who has simply been writing love songs and chasing her own version of a happy ending for 20 years.
Her upcoming choices are not a betrayal of her sacred texts. They are the final chapters she promised us all along. The next time you see a cultural panic erupting in the independent gossip news over a celebrity's personal life, ask yourself, whose story are they really terrified of? Theirs or ours? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the narrative and never forget to read the source material for yourself.